So, hello and welcome everyone. We're so excited to have all here to join us for this year's March Neuro and webinar, Neuro and AI. I'm so excited to introduce our incredible guest speakers for this month's webinar. We're honored to be joined by Schapiro, Cristina Savin, and Konrad Kording. Dr. Schapiro is an assistant professor in the Department of Psychology at the University of Pennsylvania, focusing on memory, learning, and neural network modeling. Her work investigates hippocampal-cortical interactions and the role of sleep in learning, using a combination of fMRI, EEG, and behavioral methods. Dr. Savin is an associate professor of neuroscience and data science at NYU, exploring neural principles of adaptive computation. Her research combines theoretical and statistical analysis with experimental data to understand how the brain adapts to new information. And we're thrilled to be joined by Konrad again, who was our amazing guest speaker for Neuro and CompSci last September. Dr. Kording is a Penn Integrated Knowledge University professor at the University of Pennsylvania. He specializes in computational neuroscience, causality in biomedical research, and personalized medicine. He is also the co-founder of Neuromatch, a platform for free computational neuroscience education, and advocates for open science through community for rigor movement. And I'm going to hand it off to them from here to tell us a little bit more about their career journeys and experiences.
Great. So I want to first take a few minutes to introduce our guests a little bit and their research, and I have some slides prepared for that, and then we will, without slides, basically talk about careers, how we get here, what things matter, what we learned along the way, kind of all those things. So let's see. I should like click on slideshow, and now you should all see it should say IYNA meeting. Is that what you see? Wonderful, cool. So, um, the people that you see on the panel, not like Christina, Anna, and myself, aren't just a random set of people that are like kind of in computational neuroscience. There's specifically parts of the subfield that we call neuro-AI. The subfield of neuro-AI, in a way, combines ideas from artificial intelligence with ideas about brains. And I think there's a lot that they have in common. And I like to use this slide about their relationship. Now, like you can say, the brain that you have in your head has evolved to be good for the world that's there, out there. Not like we have the brain, out goes behavior into the world. The world stuff happens in the world, and in comes kind of like stimuli for our brain. And what also comes in at some level is evolutionary fitness. You know, like some animals live, others die, some have babies, others don't, and that's kind of how our brains come into existence. I should also say, no, there's the long time scale of evolutionary time scale, there's the short time scale. Oh, in life, not like we're the brain, like we're born into this world, and kind of like we hopefully get better. We understand more and more about brains, and and so there's learning and evolution. Now, machine learning is arguably a little bit similar. Not like machine learning, the algorithms that like Google's using, that are in ChatGPT and all the things that we all know and love. What goes in is like data from the world, just like data from the world goes into brains, and it's kind of the same data. It's drawn from the same distribution, if you will, or at least very similar. And then we have an algorithm that are running on the machines, and then that algorithm produces stuff that we use in the real world. And that can be very simple stuff like, hey, that's a number five, and very complicated stuff like the thing that would make it least likely that my robot will die is the following command. Now, like, the key thing though is that there's like this analogy where you can say the algorithms that we currently build in AI are like logically similar to brains. And out of that come then a lot of different branches of the field. There is the how can we use AI to understand brains? And I think like all of us have worked in that area. But there's also the idea, how can we use principles from AI to understand aspects about the brain? And then there are things that like what do brains have in common with a with machine learning algorithms, kind of by virtue that they're kind of part of the same world at some level. Not like there's a big combination. So I want to briefly introduce Christina, Anna, and then like briefly myself. Um, Christina started with a PhD in Frankfurt, which incidentally is just half an hour drive from where I grew up. Christina, how was it like doing a PhD in Frankfurt?
Frankfurt's great.
I think it's a wonderful city for anyone who gets the chance to look at that. Um, and there she worked with some people that were very early on into like this neuro AI logic. In this case, Jochen Triesch has been truly interested in a long time. And she did, for example, very cool work on how neurons can do ICA. Christina, tell us a little about like why would neurons want to do ICA?
Well, we think that the brain cares about what's out there in the world in the form of sort of relevant statistical regularities. And ICA is one way of very simple way of extracting statistical regularities from a stream and experience. And although we understand that mathematically, it's actually not trivial to make a circuit model that does the same thing.
Yeah, I think we both started like building these like circuit models that were meant to do interesting thing with activities. A lot of people in the neuro AI field have a somewhat similar trajectory there, you know, where we start like kind of close to the brain, like what could that mean? And then eventually we get like, at least for in my case, I get pretty stuck in the broader, let's think more deeply about AI direction. I should say the last time I met Christina in person, we were at like this wonderful conference in, it was Norway, if I remember that right. And it was wonderful to see kind of Christina really help like maybe the more experimentally thinking people to like become more precise in the way to think about computation. So it was a great experience being there together. So let's see. And then afterwards, she did a postdoc on memory. And I should also say I chose Christina's and Anna's papers without asking them what I should feature. So this might not be the papers that they would choose themselves, but Christina went on to do a postdoc focusing on memory, doing great work here in this paper, for example, with Marta Lengyel and Peter Dayan, where it was kind of like, how can neurons kind of do memory-like things? Christina, what was the big idea behind this?
So this is actually one of a good example for one of the ways in which the interaction between machine learning and neuroscience works in the context of our work. Sort of like the idea is that if you have a function of the brain that is really important for the organism, that is sort of like very incentivized to do well, like memory, then asking the questions, what's the best possible computational way of doing that particular function in precise mathematical terms can tell you something about idiosyncratic weird properties about the brain as sort of being adapted to solve that particular function. So in this particular paper, we're asking if I've stored information in my brain via certain forms of synaptic plasticity, how should how should my hippocampus, so a particular area in the brain involved in memory, dynamically retrieve that information when probed with the cue? Sort of like the idea is that the synaptic plasticity is an encoding mechanism or sort of like a lossy compression kind of mechanism that takes information from the worlds and compacts it in the strength of the connections between neurons. And then the dynamics are the decoding or readout mechanism that goes from those synapses back into sort of representations of what's out there in the world.
Cool. And I wanted to briefly zoom out for everyone about this way of thinking that you just had. You know, like we're not just thinking about what is there in brains. It's not just about like looking at the hardware. It's very much there's always like an undertone on what it's good for. Why is that useful? Like we call that normative thinking. And I think Christina's work is just like wonderfully enigmatic for that way of thinking. It's kind of like we are not starting at zero. We're kind of like trying to bring it. We're starting with knowledge about what would be useful. So let me go to the next work. So then she started as professor at NYU. This is one of the papers that I particularly liked, where she showed that if you look at online learning systems, that you can there's so many different proposed algorithms, but you can kind of see them like basically she made a map for like how all these different algorithms are different. What would be the upshot for you out of this?
Yeah, so that's actually very much how we set out to do this. So again, we're interested in how the brain does online learning because experience comes one moment at a time, so it's naturally online. And we're interested in computationally like efficient ways of doing online learning because again, learning is an important thing for the organism. So brain learning might share some features with mathematically efficient solutions for online learning. And when we were looking at the machine learning literature from this perspective, we found a zoo of different kind of algorithms. But it wasn't very clear what there were, to the authors at least, in some cases, what exactly were the principles behind what they were doing, how the different algorithms were related to one another, and sort of like how similar or how different pairs of algorithms might be. So we set out this effort of sort of like making a map of the land, of trying to like put all of them in a unified mathematical framework. So we know exactly what they're doing and how they're similar and how they're different. And we show that this arrangement is actually predictive of their performance. So algorithms that are similar by our mathematical principles behave similarly when trying to learn in the context of specific tasks, and algorithms that are like from different kind of classes like are actually distinguishable. They learn differently in the same kind of a learning scenario. So
Wonderful, great. So here's just another example, again, like a way of normatively thinking about what we should have, how we should think about plasticity. Um, I understand I'm supposed to get like a little quickly through the introductions, and of course I'm slower than I had planned. So maybe let's skip this one and let's briefly talk about Anna, and then because we want to have like plenty of time to answer all your questions, and I love keeping these things interactive. Um, cool. So Anna got her PhD from Princeton. She did some very cool work on how artificial neural networks can have memory. Anna, tell me how that started.
So we are also interested in this region of the brain, the hippocampus, that we think is so important for quickly forming new memories in our brain. And the traditional way that people have thought about this memory structure is that it allows you to kind of like take individual snapshots of your experience. So if you interact with a hippocampal amnesiac, they are unable to form any new memories at all. So you could have a conversation with them, and then if they get distracted or you leave the room and come back in, they will have no memory whatsoever that they had just met you. And so there's a huge, literature on trying to understand that function of the hippocampus. But we had been noticing that the hippocampus is also important for understanding, again, the statistics. So we have a lot in common, Christina, across experiences. So not just like one snapshot at a time, but also like kind of what's going on in your environment over the time scale of like minutes or maybe hours. And so there was a kind of like a puzzle there of like, how does one brain region do both of these things? And so we turned to this neural network model that has different sub-regions that correspond to different parts of the hippocampus, and it has connectivity that's inspired by what we know about the actual, connectivity and some of the physiological properties of the hippocampus. And that helped us to figure out how it could be that one brain structure could kind of have these two different functions that almost seem like the opposite. Like in one case, you're like keeping track of individual things separate from everything else. And in the other case, you're like noticing how everything is related. And basically the answer is the hippocampus is not a homogeneous structure. There's different subfields, there's different pathways. And so we put out this argument using this model to say that those two different functions of the hippocampus are supported by complementary pathways within the hippocampus.
Great. So I wanted to briefly to start building a little bit about those fabric. No, you already saw like how Christina and Anna like are working on related things. Briefly, I wanted to mention Matt Botvinnik because he's just like one of these like truly interesting pieces in the neuro AI space where if I remember that right, Matt, roughly at the time when you did your PhD, he started working for Google DeepMind as well, no?
He actually left Princeton. So he did a sabbatical at DeepMind and got so excited that he actually gave up his professor position at Princeton and moved to DeepMind to start the neuroscience unit there, and took all the students just younger than me with him. So there's this like alternate life of, the people who kind of went the more heavily AI route, thinking about neuroscience from the industry world. But I stuck in academia kind of thinking about AI from the neuroscience world.
Sounds like we just got lucky. Just the last opportunity to not lose you to industry, which by the way is also like a general this like industry versus academia context. I think is probably something that we should discuss a little later as we get into our time here. Wonderful. And then you did a postdoc that went a little bit into mechanism, if I remember that right, looking at MRI data and lesion data.
Yeah, I was doing those things as well during my PhD. The theme of my postdoc was sleep. So I became convinced towards the end of my PhD that a really important part of the memory consolidation process is happening while we're sleeping. And that region of the brain, the hippocampus, is reactivating our recent memories during sleep and helping us kind of integrate that new information with all of our existing knowledge stored in the rest of the brain. And so I decided to do my postdoc in a lab that specializes in collecting sleep data from humans, so that I would be able to set up my own lab using that technique. So this is an example of a paper where we show that hippocampal amnesics, so again, people who don't have access, they don't have a working hippocampus, they actually show impairment in their consolidation, even of a task that didn't require the hippocampus to start with. So a motor learning task is a type of task that you don't need your hippocampus to learn, but it turns out that you need your hippocampus to consolidate that task. So there's something important about hippocampal reactivation of your recent experience that's like important across the board, across different kinds of memory.
So how do you think about sleep? Let's just love to for everyone to hear kind of from you. Like why do
Yeah.
we sleep and how is sleep even useful?
We think that it's like broadly, it's very hard to encode information from your environment at the same moment that you're processing the information and thinking about like how it makes sense to you. So if you're listening to me speaking or you're watching a lecture and then you kind of like it reminds you of something, and then you kind of like go into your head and you start thinking about that thing that it reminded you of, you're going to lose track of what I'm saying in the moment. We're not very good at kind of like generating our own understanding at the exact same time that you're encoding information from the world. And so we think there's always this tension between like being engaged in the sensory environment and then kind of like going more internal and thinking about your own predictions and your own understanding. And we think that sleep is like the ultimate example of that. So it's a way of completely like shutting off the external world and just letting your brain process what just happened to you. And so we think that there's a process both of just like kind of going back over, we know we literally reactivate memories of our recent experiences during sleep. So that's happening. And then we also think that there's a process of kind of integration of that new information in to kind of like carefully situate it in the correct spot for its long-term storage in different parts of neocortex. So there's a lot of interesting neuroscience work on that. And there's also a lot of emerging interesting modeling work trying to think through like what, how do you get brain structures to like do something useful by themselves when there's no more information from the environment. That's an interesting computational puzzle. And so it's actually a really exciting area for crosstalk between computational modeling work and empirical work.
Wonderful. So it's not that sleep is like this horrible, dangerous place where we have nightmares, but sleep is a key sense-making aspect of the human brain.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're like, I would say it's completely a mystery, like what the role of dreams is in all of this and whether dreams have a function or whether there's some kind of epiphenomenon of this interesting neural activity that's happening. But I do think it's possible that what's happening with dreams is that it's some interpretation, conscious interpretation of like underlying neural activity that is doing something useful to make sense of our memories, but that's I wouldn't say that that's understood yet, but we know more about the basic like activity patterns in the brain during sleep. It's harder to study dreams, but anyway, your point is sleep is useful. I agree.
Wonderful. So let me just like with Cristina, skip over the last slide so that we have enough time. Briefly, how did I get here? I did a PhD where I had a simple normative idea, which basically said neurons in the visual system should be good at representing the things that exist in the real world. And I trained neural networks to do that. Incidentally, not that dissimilar to the ICA approaches that Cristina was using. And these models that were tuning kind of neural networks were pretty good at describing quantitatively what neurons are doing. And then I did a postdoc with Daniel Walpert, which again, it was completely different. In the first case for my PhD, I was modeling individual neurons, visual responses. Here I was modeling the whole human behaviors, like how they combine what they know from before with what they newly learn. But what the two I have in common 100% is this normative way of thinking that I'm like, basically, what would it mean for a neuron to do the right thing with visual scenes? What would it mean for a human body to do the right things with things that it knows and things that it's just currently learning? So the idea is I assume that people optimally combine what they believed before with new data. I derive the optimal solutions using math, and alternatively now I could maybe derive the optimal solution using a neural network. And then we make prediction, and the prediction is simply, let's assume that the brain does it the right way, and then we test it in experiments. And I should say in that like Bayesian modeling of behavior, I did my postdoc there, and I think like 3 years ago or so, we came out with this textbook. And that may be one of the last times that I work on Bayesian modeling of behavior, because now I'm super excited about Neuro&AI, and I kind of moved on from that topic a little bit. And I'll skip, just like for everyone else, I'll also skip my last slide. And it's now time to kind of like move into a much more free-form discussion. I think we're all happy to talk about what matters to us. I think we're all happy to talk about, I think Cristina and Anna are unique in having really, really good taste about questions. But I think we're also happy to talk about the careers, how we got here, what prepared us to be successful in this field, and we're basically ready to answer anything that you're interested in. And you can take it away and moderate that discussion.
So some of the really insightful questions we received from our pre-webinar form is that the first question is, how do you see the role of neuroscience evolving in the development of AI systems, especially when it comes to improving cognitive abilities like memory, learning, and decision-making in machines?
Yeah, why don't you go first, Christina?
Sure. So despite of the amazing feats that machine learning today is showing, like some that maybe we didn't even believe possible 5-10 years ago, there's still bits that are where sort of actual brains win the competition. And that's about adaptability. So that's kind of my favorite topic, which is how do you learn from very little experience? Like if you don't have a size of the data that's the size of the internet, but you still need to like adaptively change your behavior in the world, how do you do that with one example? And there is where I think sort of like there's really potential of still learning new things about the brain for developing our artificial general intelligence. A lot of what we're doing today is really the other way around. So it's taking the most powerful and more useful tools from machine learning into the neuroscience domain and trying to use them in order to understand the brain better. But I do still think that there's potential for interaction in both directions.
Yeah, I see a lot of potential interaction. So I'm not sure if everyone has followed that so much. The way LLMs work today is very different to the way the LLMs work 6 months ago. So 6 months ago, LLMs mostly are like, this is the next word. This is the next word. So we basically trained them to be good at next word predictions. And I think we have switched as a field much more into a mode that you could call learning to think, where the LLM basically talks to itself like on a scratch pad, where it figures out things, and we basically now train them so that they're good at that thinking process, at that self-improvement process. And I think this transition to learning to think in a way makes them much more like humans. Like the way we learn is like, I'm like, okay, because of this, and because of that. And then like we're wrong at a overall. And it's like, okay, like how could we have thought this? Oh, that was like actually a thought possibility. How could I have made sure that I would have seen that thought possibility? So I think kind of like it's almost like today's systems are getting more cognitively sophisticated. And so I think that in the future it's going to be less, not like in the past, the inspiration was often like, look, there's a neuron, and like here's a neuron in the brain, and let's build something that like has neurons. And if you want, like back then, it was the architecture of the brain that itself was like the cellular architecture that was very inspiring. I think it's more like now about brain regions, like hippocampus allows us to like replay things. How should we be replaying things? How do people replay things? How do kind of people do credit assignment? I think there's like a rich set of ways how things become more cognitive.
I agree with all of that. We can move to the next question. I don't have much to add to that.
How does AI shape the neuroscience research you do, and what are the biggest challenges you encountered in using AI to study the brain?
Yeah, I mean, I think like Christina, we also are very interested in like keeping up with some of the new exciting engineering advances and seeing whether there's something that strikes us as potentially brain-like, like the example that Konrad just gave, and then seeing if that allows us to better explain neural data or behavioral data in humans or in animals. And so, yeah, we're very interested in that kind of approach.
And I think it's key to realize that there's just so many different logical pieces of how AI is useful for us. So AI is useful for us to develop math about it, because math about brains, because AI came up with good ways of describing the behavior of big neural networks. Now, like I'm thinking about neural tangent kernels, race models, kind of like there's like a rich emerging set of ideas. It is useful as a tool, not like we have people like Eva Dyer who build the best current neural decoding systems are taking in a lot of neural data and like decoding what animals or humans want to do at a given point of time. Um, they are useful as for data generation. So when neuroscientists say we use what's called spike sorting, like just at the beginning, you put in some electrodes into a brain, try and figure out when a neuron is active. That itself is now a machine learning process. So kind of like the machine learning component is everywhere in lots of different logical positions.
Dr. Savin, do you have any points to add on to that?
I was just thinking about the challenges. I find that the biggest challenge right now when interacting productively with machine learning is the speed at which things are moving. It's extremely hard to be like keep on top of the literature and really understand how these increasingly complex models work and how you can use them in a relevant way. That that is a tall ask. That's why we have students to delegate some of the job. But it is an exciting time. I think we have a richer set of tools now than ever before, and that should open new avenues for understanding the brain better.
Yeah, totally. Also, I saw this really interesting question. How do you think we can best harness AI to improve human lives?
Okay. I thought about that a lot because my wife is a labor economist. So we are kind of really Ioana Marinescu is her name. She's a wonderful leading labor economist, and our dining room table discussions are all about how AI is going to reshape mankind. There are lots of places where AI is promises to make lives of humans better in lots of ways. You know, like um, take the neuroscience applications. You know, like the coolest thing that like I've ever seen in neural engineering is being able to decode text in basically real time from someone's brain who can't talk. I mean, like, talk about cool stuff. Not like, yeah, that makes that person's life better. Like being able to speak is awesome. I love speaking. Maybe too much so. Um, but like in society, it promises at the same time to do some really great things. Let's say make a lot of bullshit jobs go away. You know, like if I need to like formulate a polite email, I write one sentence, tell ChatGPT to make it polite, and it makes like a nice one page like bullshit email, and the person who gets it like uses ChatGPT to cut it down to one sentence. What does Konrad really want to say? And like it's all good. And so I think like making bullshit jobs go away is one of the good things. Making perfectly wonderful jobs like artist jobs go away is like one of the horrible things.
I saw some questions in the chat about methods. So the first one I have is can uh the first one is about like what math courses should I take in university to do the kind of research that Cristina does. So maybe you can talk about how you're prepared, like what prepares you for your career journey.
Sure. We can go how I got there and what should have been the correct path or the optimal path instead. So I trained as a computer scientist in Romania, where we do a little bit more math in CS than you would do in the US, for instance. And at the time in my undergraduate, I started doing research in artificial intelligence at the moment in time where those things didn't really work very well. So before the AI revolution, in a sense. And that's kind of what got me on the path to study neuroscience. I sort of like, if you want to understand how intelligence works, better look at the system that's actually somewhat intelligent. So and then sort of like, yes, we try to like focus on a lot of the nitty-gritty details of the brain, the way I was doing in my PhD. And that got frustrating too, because there's so many details that we know about the brain, but it's not clear how they come together. And then machine learning came back into the equation as okay, what are principles, what are computational goals, how we can think about implementational details with respect to the algorithmic and computational goals. Yes, so that was my path. What you actually need to do some of these things well is like linear algebra is good for everything. Everybody should know linear algebra. And probability and statistics is also good. Those are sort of like general purpose. You're gonna go far with just that. Specifically for the kind of stuff that we do, additionally, we're really interested in dynamical systems and control theory. Those tend to bring a lot of an extra level of understanding of some of the phenomenology that we're dealing with. But yeah, linear algebra and probability and statistics.
But I wanted to add a little bit there. So if you look at how Cristina got into this amazing area, it's a combination of two things that are rarely combined. Her research clearly deeply cares about biology, and yet she's doing like super hardcore computer science. This combination is really, really rare. There's a lot of computer scientists who like peripherally care about the brain. There's a lot of brain scientists who like take a computer science course. The thing that in my reading, and correct me, Cristina, if I'm wrong there, that enabled her to be like that impactful is that she's kind of like has true mastery in two areas that very few people master both simultaneously. And I think this is like, for me, the career advice to everyone today. It's not even, I mean, like, yes, linear algebra and is very important, but beyond that, I think the key is you want to find combinations that are relatively rare. Like there's very few people that are strong computer scientists that are great at user interfaces. They're like kind of like the world has there's lots of combinations that are kind of empty. And if you're working in a space that is relatively empty, you can enjoy life much more than if you're in a place where there's 100 people that have exactly the same training as you. And I think I find myself in like a similar place. I trained in physics, also deeply care about like details of biology. And turns out that like the number of people who like have deep training in both is like somewhat limited. And I think the same can be said about Anna's trajectory.
The next question we have in the chat is that can fMRI and brain mapping replace neuropsychological tests? And how do you see the future of neuropsychology and psychophysiology with the development of AI?
I can take this. So yeah, and then there's another question a little farther down about fMRI methods and what are the ways that we can what are the methods we have for recording activity from the brain? So maybe I can hit both of those. So in humans, fMRI is certainly one of our best techniques. Generally speaking, we have to do non-invasive recording from humans, right? So there's a question about like, can we just implant everybody with the Neuralink chips? And I think no, probably you would need to have some kind of need for that. Brain surgery is a big deal. There are people who have intractable epilepsy who it's not uncommon for them to need neural recordings deep in their brain in order to monitor for seizure activity. And there's actually quite a lot of labs that are interested in using those recordings to understand the brain directly in humans. But generally, we are restricted to non-invasive imaging, so that's fMRI, and then also EEG and MEG are other techniques that we have access to. None of them are great in terms of spatial resolution. So fMRI, we can get down to like maybe a millimeter best kind of resolution, which still has, there's still many, many neurons within a millimeter of tissue, but it's not terrible. But the temporal resolution is terrible. So on the order of many seconds of resolution temporally, and then EEG and MEG are very high resolution temporally, but very, very poor resolution spatially. So we're fundamentally limited by our current methods, I would say, and we cannot replace neuropsychological tests. Or like you might have heard of people, wanting to use fMRI as a lie detector, like, looking in and seeing whether you're telling the truth about something or not. I think that that's not possible, basically. We would need really big updates to to the actual technology. It's not a matter of better analyses. So I don't think that we're ever going to be able to, well, with our current technology, I don't think that we can replace behavioral testing or the kind of standard neurological testing approach.
I mean, I'd like to add a little bit that there exist places where there's interesting developments. Like you can diagnose certain diseases based on movement. In fact, my lab works on some. We take videos of babies to see if the baby's brain is developing healthily. So there is a place, I think, for AI to make behavioral analysis better.
Definitely, yeah.
And but yes, I mean, like at some level, you can say behavioral analysis is exactly the neuropsychiatric alternative traditionally.
Yeah, that's right. And behavior is actually a very high precision thing. It's like often underestimated as a important um, variable to measure, right? So like behavior is crucial to neuroscience, and like interesting analyses of behavior, including using AI, is actually like a very exciting direction for sure.
And sometimes neuroscience is overestimated. There's a whole bunch of people who use AI to try and figure out if someone has schizophrenia, and they're totally better than chance. And if you ask people, "Do you hear voices?" You're
Right.
3 times as good as the best MRI results. So like there exist those funny things.
Yeah, and I should say also, of course, that like much of neuroscience is not done in humans, right? It's done in animals. And for animals, you can do more invasive recording. And so quite a lot of what we know about the brain is from, recording from individual neurons or groups of neurons in animals.
That was some great discussion. Then you can unmute yourself and ask your questions.
Hi, so I had a quick question. So you mentioned how it's important that we have a mastery of two fields such as neuroscience and computation and how that can really help us in our future. So I just wanted to ask you, do you think that there's going to be a larger abundance of people taking initiatives and researching more in neuroscience and computation in the future? Or do you think that the limited amount of people that are still in it will be proportionate in the future as well?
I mean, personally, I think that we aren't gonna run out of jobs for these cross-trained people in a long time because it's hard to do both. I find that the culture of question asking that is really common on the biology side of things often doesn't resonate well with the way computer scientists think. Exceptions granted, of course. And and at the same time, no, like because when we do computer science, we like having like nice definitions and well-defined problems and meaningful benchmarks. And what's a meaningful benchmark for brain understanding? It's very hard to think like that.
There
And
are programs that are interdisciplinary on purpose to try to develop people like this. So I actually went to Stanford because I already was a dork like all of you are when I was in high school, because you're attending this thing. That's awesome. And I when I was deciding where to go to college, I saw that Stanford actually had a program called Symbolic Systems, which was it's like a cognitive science-like program with a very heavy like computer science angle. But the idea was basically the theme is how do we think about the brain as a computer? And we took philosophy of mind classes and linguistics and psychology and neuroscience and computer science and logic and so that was totally amazing to be able to like be in a program that valued that interdisciplinary thinking that early on. The risk, of course, with that kind of program is that you don't get the depth, right? But you could still kind of like concentrate in whatever aspect of that's most exciting to you. So there are programs like that. They're often called cognitive science programs. Cognitive science is kind of a inherently interdisciplinary field. Or a lot of universities allow you to make your own major. So you could look at schools that have a major like that and see if you can design something like that, so that you kind of develop yourself into that kind of cross-disciplinary person.
Thank you so much.
Shanto, I saw you raised your hand.
I have some interest in neurotech, so maybe I should take the question. So, a Neuralink device is something that we'd implant in adults. Babies' brains are growing very quickly. We need to get the robot very close to the infant's brains, and even then, the growth of the brain would make things very traumatic. I don't think implanting devices into growing babies is something that current neurotech has on its development path, at least not in the next few years. There are some extreme cases where they do surgery on brains of embryos relatively early on, like if there's like an obvious neural development problem, but those are very rare and suddenly not with brain implants.
So how could we possibly use AI to prevent cerebral palsy, so to maximize brain cell growth in fetuses, so that it's sort of like something that every pregnant woman can take to as a precaution, or like vitamins, like multivitamins, to ensure that your baby doesn't come out with cerebral palsy or any other neurodegenerative disorders or diseases.
I mean, by and large, baby development is coupled to maternal health. So I think the best interventions that we have in the field at the moment are just those that make sure that mothers are healthy. And I don't think AI can help us for that at all at this point of time. This is like generally AI systems are great at making predictions, but what we want here is causal interventions. Like what can we do so that moms are more healthy and babies come out more healthy as well. I don't think that AI is very useful for this at this point of time.
Thank you.
I saw another question in the chat about artificial neural networks. So does ANN truly replicate brain activity, or is it just an analogy?
It can be a close or a not so close analogy, depending on the problem and on the exact circuit that you're talking about. A lot of the work that we're trying to do, we're trying to make the analogy quite close. Again, by sort of having a good idea about what we think the circuit is trying to do, and building bounded rationality solution that respects as many of the operating constraints of the actual circuit as possible. So we're thinking that the brain tries to do the best possible thing, conditioned on things that it's allowed to do because of physics and biology and how brains work. So at that level, you can make close analogies. You can make much looser analogies if we're talking about how the sort of embedding spaces of an LLM relate to activity in the Broca's areas or something like that. Like those I don't treat as being particularly close, but there's a lot of spectrum in between.
There's like there is a field that is using neural network models to predict brain activity, right? So like so what we've talked about so far is like building models where we sort of hope that the assumptions of the model give rise to something that looks brain-like, right? And if it does, then that makes us feel like maybe we understand the mechanisms that are required in order to see that kind of brain activity, right? Or it provides a hypothesis about what those mechanisms might be that could then be tested. But there's another approach, which is to say, like, these models are really powerful. Maybe we should just directly predict brain activity. How well can we do that? And so there are people who are taking that approach, and it's not as clear always what you learn from the success of that. But it does work to some extent. And in that case, you could say it's kind of like a more direct version of explaining the brain.
So, but I just briefly wanted to emphasize the big difference. So, like, a neuron in a deep learning system is usually like a ReLU unit is probably still the most popular one, which is just a function that takes as input a couple of channels, linearly adds them up together, and if they're smaller, if that sum is smaller than 0, it sets it to 0. No, like it's a very, very simple nonlinearity. Whereas if you look at real neurons, say cortical pyramidal neurons, it's very likely that the best way of thinking about it is rather that it's like many neurons, where you can say in the dendrites we have nonlinear integration about things, and we have a hierarchy of that, where a little piece of the dendrite is combined with another little piece of the dendrite. So maybe the right way of thinking about it is it's more like a given real neuron is like 4 layers of a neural network or something.
There is an additional question about ANN. So how do ANN develop and retain memory, and what are the key mechanisms that contribute to long-term retention in these models?
I mean, like very broadly speaking, memory, as I think Cristina said earlier, is stored in the connection weights between the units in the models. And unless you do something, the connection weights stay the same. And so it like if you have plenty of capacity and you sort of have an experience that modifies a bunch of connection weights in a way that allows you to kind of recapitulate that experience later, kind of understand that input-output function, then you've sort of, there's no long-term memory problem in the sense that like you stored the numbers, the weights are stored and they don't have to change. But then there's interesting, okay, so now you have new experiences and maybe you want to try to use the same connections now, right, that you were using before. So how do you protect the old memories as you're learning new things? So that's a problem called continual learning that is of interest to all of us, I think. And so we could talk about that, but I think that that's the basic answer, is just like it's the memories are stored in connection weights and they're by default kind of forever lasting. There's no cellular local consolidation that needs to happen to keep that number around in your neural network.
But you can say when it comes to memory, like we do have a problem in neural networks. We build things like LSTMs to protect values that we want to store that like will stick around for a little bit.
That's like a working memory analogy, right? I was thinking of like long-term memory, like, what's the basis of a long-term lasting memory? But that's right. So there's also kind of like your short-term memory, your ability to keep track of stuff in your mind and in kind of like an active state. How do you keep track of the right things for the right amount of time? in order to do that. So yeah, that's true. It's another type of memory.
I saw some questions about careers. So the first one is, what preparation advice would you give to a high schooler or high school student interested in diving into neuroscience?
So I can start. In general, I mean, like the first thing that I think is super important is strive towards doing something unique. If something is such that there's thousands of people trying to learn the same thing as you, let's say deep learning. Everyone's learning deep learning right now. Like there was a joke a few years ago where someone set up a webpage called Keras for kindergartners. Basically, back then, Keras was the package that everyone is using. Learning like a deep learning framework will do preciously little for you. I think to start with, I'd strive to be unique. For example, I know very few people who know deeply about ethics and also know about deep learning. Like then you start having interesting, non-trivial combinations. But otherwise, I mean, like I would strive to like get my brain into a well-working situation, and for that, doing things that are hard is I think the way to really like advance your way of thinking, I always find is like really look for weaknesses in your way of thinking. And that it feels like that is much easier when you do something like physics or computer science maybe or math than it is in say even in neuroscience. No? So it's almost like if you want to learn neuroscience, and I will now say something super heretic that I think Christina and Anna are gonna kill me for, but like basically, I think if you want to do neuroscience, if eventually what you should do is not neuroscience. It should be like acquiring hard computational skills that you can then bring to it. So if I look at people that I admire in neuroscience, they come from lots of different areas. They're often like cognitive science, computer science, physics, electrical engineering. There's a remarkably small number of people who studied neuroscience. Why in neuroscience, you can't be unique if you study neuroscience because everyone who wants to do neuroscience already studied neuroscience. So it's kind of like I try and become different more so than becoming a neuroscientist per se.
I completely agree that with everything you said, including that like developing some of the like computational and math skills are really useful, and it's kind of harder to pick those things up later. And I agree you should kind of front load those things. But if you're interested in neuroscience or AI or their intersection, you don't need to like defer your excitement about them, right? So just some ways to get yourself like excited and thinking in this space and orienting to your space could be reading books. So we could recommend books. There's lots of exciting books that are written in a way that is accessible to people without a lot of knowledge of the field, that can just get you thinking about like what aspects of these questions are exciting to me. And there's also podcasts now. So there's this like what's it called? Neuro-inspired, brain-inspired podcast, where this guy just like interviews
I think
individual
both Konrad
scientists.
and I did that already.
Yeah, I did it too. So you can go and find our brain-inspired podcast episodes. And I actually love them as a way of just like getting a really like efficient overview of somebody's research program and the things that they're thinking about right now. So and Paul Middlebrooks is good at like kind of extracting things in a way that will be accessible. So that's an easy way if you like podcasts to just like who's exciting here and what are they thinking about and what's like the space of new ideas. So yeah, you don't need to do your math and your programming and whatever, but keep yourself excited about the applications and the ideas, and that's a good way.
Another question is, what specific industry opportunities are there for computational neuroscientists? So I feel like this kind of tied back to the academia and the industry part you mentioned before.
Mm-hmm. So there are fairly many industry opportunities. They tend to veer more AI proper than neuro AI as such, but they're sort of like at the intersection a little bit to the left side. So many of our PhD students take at least one summer to do an internship in industry, because by the time you graduate, you kind of want to have a sense of how life looks in both academia and in industry to be able to make informed decisions about what you want to do next and what's a better use of your time, in a sense. I don't know that I want to say more of that, but yeah, you just have to reach out for the opportunities. Like, there's no centralized way of finding out about these things. It kind of takes quite a bit of effort to know what the options are and apply for the internships and so on.
Yeah,
Konrad?
I think industry has an at the moment, or like for a long time, had a high appetite in people that think through really complex problems like brains in ways that produce clarity. So they've traditionally been very happy to hire the graduates out of like labs like ours. I think most comp neuro labs have former trainees in Google, in the Googles and Facebooks of the world. Like, I think there is like a pipeline happening there. I think this is good. Not like the way I think about industry and academia is in academia, you clearly make about half as much money as you'd make otherwise. So the reason why we do that is because it's just really awesome to ask the questions that we feel are the big questions in the world. I'm sorry, there's a children's party in the background. If like it looks like someone's being murdered, like it's not actually a murder. It's just like little kids with one another. Yeah. What else?
I'm more on the I'm actually in a psychology department, and a lot of our graduates go on to do like data science kinds of things, and that like every company in the world needs people who know how to look at data and do interesting things with it and visualize it well, and that's the kind of training that you get in a PhD program, doing kind of like computational cognitive science type of things. And so a lot of people end up in that space. But again, it's not typically like neuroscience content, right? It's just like using the tools and applying them to interesting like data problems. But I know a lot of people who are like very intellectually engaged and stimulated by what they end up doing, even if they kind of aren't as engaged in the neuroscience world. But who knows? Maybe there will be more companies like Neuralink, and there's like Facebook is trying to develop like simple EEG red sensor things that there might be more of this like neurotech world by the time you all would be graduating out into the world where there'd actually, in addition to all the like data science AI kinds of skills, having some neuroscience expertise will be valued as well.
That was really insightful. To conclude our talk today, we hope everyone was able to take something away from this discussion. Thank you so much to Dr. Schapiro, Dr. Savin, and Dr. Kording for taking the time to share with us your career insights and perspectives on a fascinating discussion around artificial intelligence. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you for your
Thanks so much,
questions.
everybody, for your great questions.
Thank
you.
you.